Welcome to this explainer. Let's dive right into one of the most incredible texts from the ancient world, Isaiah 58. We are going to break down the massive difference between just going through the religious motions to check a box and the kind of true boots-on-the-ground compassion that actually changes the world. Right out of the gate, the chapter opens with a literal blast. Isaiah chapter 58, verse 1 reads, "Cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet." That imagery is so powerful, right? God is telling the prophet to hold absolutely nothing back. It establishes this immediate, urgent wake-up call to a people who have seriously lost their way. So, here's our roadmap for today. First, a call to repentance. Second, the problem of false fasting. Third, God's chosen true fast. Fourth, the promises of obedience. Fifth, repairing the broken breach. And finally, honoring the holy Sabbath. Okay, let's jump right into section 1, a call to repentance, seeking true restoration. To get some context, in chapters 56 through 58, we're looking at a group of people who are desperately seeking some sort of physical and spiritual restoration. Listen to how Isaiah 58, verse 2 describes them. "Yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways. They take delight in approaching to God." On paper, they look fantastic. They're checking all those daily religious boxes. But there is a huge disconnect here. Their outward rituals are totally masking a complete lack of actual, everyday justice. They act like this righteous nation, but underneath, it's entirely superficial. Which brings us to section 2, the problem of false fasting, ritual without righteousness. This is the core issue of the whole chapter. The Israelites have completely, and I mean completely, misunderstood what fasting was even for. In verse 3, they're actually complaining. They say, "Why have we fasted and you see it not? Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge?" You can feel their frustration. They're doing the ritual, but God is silent. Well, God fires right back. "Behold, in the day of your fast you find pleasure and exact all your labors." He's basically saying, look, you might be skipping meals, but you're still exploiting your workers and doing whatever you want. Now, to really grasp this critique, we have to understand what the day of your fast originally meant to them. Under the law, there was literally only one required fast, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, right there in Leviticus 16. It was designed to be this incredibly solemn day of deep self-reflection. But these folks, they had taken God's single prescribed fast and twisted it into a completely self-serving practice. And honestly, it gets worse. Verse 4 says, "Behold, ye fast for strife and debate, and to smite with the fist of wickedness." They were actually using fasting to justify their arguments, to assert dominance, and to try and make their voices heard on high. It reminds me a lot of the parable of the Pharisee and the publican in Luke chapter 18, using religion to grab attention rather than actually humbling themselves. They were trying to force God's hand with empty theater. So Isaiah hits them with this pivotal question in verse 5. Is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? I want you to pause and really ponder that. Are these outward signs of misery, the sackcloth, the ashes, the dramatic bowing, are those actually acceptable to the Lord if the person's heart remains totally selfish? Let's look at the fix. Section 3, God's chosen true fast, action over appearance. Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast. Think about it. On one hand, you've got this false, fast, passive, entirely focused on the self, sitting around in sackcloth and ashes. But then look at what God is actually asking for in verses 6 and 7, loosing bands of wickedness, dealing bread, freeing the oppressed. True fasting isn't about passive self-deprivation at all. It's about active, outward mercy. Let's read Isaiah chapter 58, verse 6 together. "Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that ye break every yoke?" God's chosen fast is about literally dismantling systemic injustice. It's about looking around your community, seeing who's marginalized or crushed by heavy burdens, and actually doing the work to set them free. And he keeps going in verse 7, "Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh." Real fasting requires compassionate action, period. You can't just hide from people who are hurting. A heart that's actually been transformed by God feeds the hungry, clothes the naked, and opens its doors to the outcast. Which leads us to the rewards. Section 4, The promises of obedience, from darkness to noonday. So here we step into this incredibly beautiful problem-solution-reward dynamic. In verse 8, God lays out what happens when you finally make this shift to genuine action. And the blessings are immediate and staggering. Your light will break forth as the morning. Health shall spring forth speedily. Your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will actually be a reward. It's a complete, holistic restoration of both your spiritual standing and your physical well-being. And then, he directly addresses their complaint from earlier about their unanswered prayers. Verse 9 promises, "Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am." But, catch the condition here, it's a big one. He says this happens if thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, and speaking vanity. You have to stop oppressing people, stop pointing fingers and casting blame, and stop speaking falsehoods. Do that, and God says, Here I am. Jumping down to verse 11, we read, "And the Lord shall guide thee continually, and satisfy thy soul in drought. And thou shalt be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water, whose waters fail not." I absolutely love this imagery. When you draw out your soul to the hungry, when you truly empathize and give of yourself, God makes sure that you yourself are constantly refreshed. You become this oasis that never runs dry, even when everything around you is in a severe drought. Also in verse 11 is this super fascinating phrase, "Make fat thy bones." The Benson commentary points out something great here. This phrase signifies physical health and sustenance. It's literally the exact opposite of what happens in a famine, where flesh is consumed and bones stick out. Making fat thy bones means total physical and spiritual prosperity. God isn't just going to help you barely scrape by. He's going to make you flourish. Let's look at the bigger picture. Section 5. Repairing the broken breach. Generational restoration. Up to this point, we've talked a lot about individual blessings, but verse 12 zooms out to the whole community. It paints this glorious picture. "And they that shall be of these shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach." I mean, what a title, the repairer of the breach. When you live a life of true compassion, you're actually mending broken systems and healing devastated communities. You are rebuilding what was ruined. That same verse also calls you the restorer of paths to dwell in. On a practical level, back in ancient times, this meant clearing out overgrown, desolate roads so abandoned cities could be re-inhabited. Spiritually, it's about clearing the way so others can find peace. It's an idea that heavily echoes King Benjamin's teachings over in Mosiah chapter 4, where providing for the poor is directly tied to our own spiritual retention and maintaining peace in society. Finally, section 6. Honoring the Holy Sabbath. Delight in the Lord. This brilliantly illustrates our final principle, tightly connecting Sabbath observance right back to that overarching theme of unselfishness. Verse 13 gives this instruction, "If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable." Think about it. Just like true fasting means looking past your own hunger to feed someone else, true Sabbath observance means turning away from your own selfish pursuits. To call the Sabbath a delight rather than a burden is the ultimate expression of honoring God's holy day. Which lands us on the final, incredible promise in verse 14. "Then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it." The payoff for genuine compassion and true worship isn't just physical survival. It is finding this deep, abiding joy in the Lord himself. So I'll leave you with this. When you look at your own spiritual routines, are you just bowing your head like a bulrush to check a box? Or are your actions actively breaking the yokes of the oppressed and feeding the hungry right there in your community?